Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't wear a watch anymore, and I presume all the previous speakers have yielded their time to me. But I trust someone will give me a high sign or something when I've gone on too long. Whoops, that's too far. Let me just make a couple of comments. One comment in respect to Mr. Underwood's comments about regulations in the oil and gas industry. I should say that our General Assembly, our legislature, passed some revised regulations, and Governor Beshear signed them just this past short session, and it was the result of a working group that had people from industry, private citizens, etc., and we think that we have taken a major step in moving in that direction, and we're continuing that activity. Also, Dr. Moutre talked a little bit about weather. I might introduce the word climate here in a little bit. You might see it on some of my slides. And finally, since Governor Beshear's video didn't get here, I'll offer his welcome by doing it on his behalf. He is very, very supportive of the manufacturing industry, and you'll see a couple of slides as we go through. But I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the energy landscape, particularly in Kentucky, and where we're headed. And as a matter of history, that affordable coal-fired electricity has allowed Kentucky to really attract energy-intensive industries. That's what has supported the 230,000 manufacturing jobs that we have going on in the state at this particular point in time. We have had historically, we continue to have among the lowest electricity rates in the nation. And in fact, when you look at the amount of electricity we use, nearly 50%, twice the national average of it, is used by the industrial sector. So it's a very, very important aspect to us. And keeping that manufacturing sector competitive in the 21st century is a cornerstone of the governor's policies. Let's take a little bit of a historical look, and hopefully you can see some of the numbers up on that particular slide. There are three dates that I want you to pay attention to. This looks at the Kentucky coal production by region, eastern, western Kentucky coal fields, over the last 55 years or so, more than a half century. And there are three dates up there. 1975, that's when the first SO2 standards were introduced by EPA. And the coal industry, particularly in eastern Kentucky, really grew. It wasn't the same way in the western Kentucky coal fields. Why was that? Because compliance coal, low sulfur coal, was what was being used as a mechanism to comply with the SO2 emission standards during that period of time. From 1975 until about 2005, we saw the introduction of scrubbers and the slow but persistent diffusion in the use of scrubbers, SO2 scrubbers, as the control mechanism. And you can see, beginning in about 1990, eastern Kentucky coal production began to decline. And it declined for one very simple reason. That was the demand for low sulfur coal was diminishing. And since eastern Kentucky coal was historically more expensive, it was losing its competitive edge at that point in time. Come 2010, that's when the low natural gas prices really hit, 2010. And I should say that in 2008, when we were putting the governor's energy plan together, we didn't see that dramatic reduction in the cost of natural gas. But I don't feel too bad. I don't think anybody saw it coming at that particular point in time. But you can see what happened from 2010 on. That's the precipitous decline that one sees in coal production, particularly and exclusively in Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky coal. We've had corresponding dramatic reductions in employment. The reductions in employment have been staggering for eastern Kentucky. But you can see 75, 05, 10, there were a series of events that really have very much impacted what is going on. So what is behind these numbers? This just reiterates what I had said. Competition from low-priced natural gas right now is what is claiming the day. Decreasing productivity in eastern Kentucky mining operations. It's about the highest priced coal in the nation. The utilities switch to high sulfur coal upon installation of scrubbers, which I pointed out during that 1975 to 2000 time frame. There have been other market forces. The demand for electricity has slowed considerably. When we looked at the increasing or the demand for electricity in about 2008, that number in Kentucky was going to be about 1.5 to 1.7%. It's half of that number today. So that there's been a slowing demand for electricity. And finally, environmental regulations have been affecting coal production and use. This is even before the current discussions around 111B and 111D. MATS, the CSAPR rule, Cross-State Air Pollution Rule, have really started to move many of the consumers of eastern Kentucky coal outside of Kentucky, those utilities outside of Kentucky, where they have historically sold that coal, were switching to natural gas. And that was really what has been driving them down. So what about the oncoming EPA greenhouse gas regulations? The average age of Kentucky's coal fleet is about 44 years of age. And if in fact you look at all of the previous coal-fired units across the nation, the average retirement age is somewhere around pretty close to 65 years. So what you're looking at is, on average, that coal fleet that we have in Kentucky, this coal fleet, our coal fleet, has about 20 years, on average, about 20 years of life left. Obviously, some will be retiring sooner. Some will be going even into the 2040s, 2045 time frame now. But nevertheless, we have an aging coal fleet. And as coal plants retire, any new generation will be regulated by the standards for new electricity generating sources, and that is Section 111B, which is for new sources coming online. And unless there is some significant change from the rule as it was originally issued, based on the comments that have been received, you're not going to be able to build another coal-burning power plant without substantial use of carbon capture and storage or some other mechanism. When we provided comments to 111B, and I'll mention this later on, we recommended that with coal, if they really wanted to drive technologies in moving forward, drive technologies for more efficient combustion going to supercritical, ultra-supercritical coal EGU units. And we were recommending relaxing from the 1,100 to a higher number where you can conceive of a supercritical plant, supercritical coal-based electricity. So without options or our ability to diversify a portfolio to become wholly reliant on natural gas, Kentucky's economy would be severely compromised. This, in our office, we call this the alligator chart. And you can look at the gray region, you can see why. But this is analysis of our coal fleet here in Kentucky based on the current price of natural gas, and even if it doubles, say it goes from $3 a million to maybe $6 or $7 a million, you get the same result. This particular chart, this particular graph is based on an analysis that when a new unit is required, it will be done on the most cost-effective basis. What is that today? Low natural gas prices, cost of construction is even lower. So what we would be doing is simply going from a sort of monolithic coal generation right now to by the time you get to 2040, 2045, it would be a monolithic natural gas generation of electricity during that period of time. As a policy, we don't think that's really healthy. We do believe that diversification of the portfolio should be something that is moving forward. That scenario is not an unrealistic scenario, and I think we're going to see it. If you look at the 2015 time frame and you see that sudden increase of natural gas, we're already seeing it. Okay, we already know that there are going to be some changes because they have been announced. They've been through the Public Service Commission. We know that MATS is going to, the Mercury and Air Toxics Rule is going to retire some more coal-based plants, and as a result, we're going to go to natural gas there. So it is a picture of a very, very dramatically changing landscape. This is market-based with existing regulations. 111D is not going to make it better. It may be neutral if we're lucky, but the only thing it could do is keep it neutral or make it worse. Okay, it is not going to make it any less compelling. So that's what we're looking at for the next 35 years as we move forward with the renewal of our electricity generation. Okay, I told you I was going to talk a little bit about climate. Climate and weather are two different things. We aren't going to get into that discussion right now. We don't have time for that. But the courts have been pretty consistent on authorizing and, in fact, requiring EPA to regulate greenhouse gases. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but the Supreme Court ruling in 2007 that EPA had the authority to regulate greenhouse gases. My background, incidentally, is atmospheric chemistry. When this was being argued, I was convinced the Supreme Court was going to say EPA did not have that authority. So that's what a chemical engineer knows versus what a lawyer would tell you. But in any event, the Supreme Court was very clear. In 2009, the endangerment finding set the stage for regulations affecting mobile sources. June of 2012, the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit rejected a certain number of claims and upheld all previous EPA GHG actions. Then more recently, the Supreme Court on the tailoring rule upheld EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. I think I went too far. So what's been our response? And our responses have been public. They're on our website. You can look at them. We felt that the comments that we submitted on 111B, we were very critical of EPA in those comments. They made the assumption that carbon capture and storage was in fact commercially viable. We argue that it's absolutely not commercially viable at this particular point in time. So they were on very, very weak technical grounds, and as a result, we felt that they were very weak on legal grounds as a way of moving forward with 111B. We submitted comments on 111D, the existing sources, in November of 2014, just 6 months or so ago, and we expressed concern that EPA failed to adequately evaluate economic implications of the proposed rule and stressed issues related to potential stranded assets, which increase the cost of electricity, grid reliability, and we had other concerns. So that's sort of in a nutshell the way we approach both sets of regulations. Obviously, the rule on 111B will become final probably within the next few months. What we will see probably in the August time frame is the 111D rule, a final 111D rule being proposed, that then there will be additional commenting on that particular time period, possibly, although probably unlikely, and it will require us to move forward with plans. So let's put it in a little bit of perspective, and some of you have seen this map in a variety of ways. To me, this is the clearest one. We have taken the 50 states and simply have divided them into quintiles, 5 levels: very low, low, average, high, very high, okay? The parameter we're looking at there is the electricity consumption per dollar of state gross domestic product. That tells you something about what your economy is like. How many kilowatt hours does it take to produce $1 of gross state domestic product? And we've compared all 50 states on that basis. And red is high. I'm sorry, red is low, and green is high. So that if you're green, you're not a very electricity-intensive economy in that state. And among the highest are New York and California. You can understand why they look at greenhouse gas regulations and the potential impact of those very differently than those of us who are in the red. Our economies very, very much depend on electricity and its use for everything that we manufacture. Service-based economies, like New York, like California, don't have the same manufacturing requirement. And as Greg has heard me say on many occasions, I like to tell my friends in New York that you're driving the Toyotas or the Fords or whatever that were manufactured in Kentucky. And in California, I say you're using the refrigerator that was made by GE in Louisville. So in any event, we are a producing state. The Greens are consuming states. Very, very important point that we have made repeatedly to Gina McCarthy and to Janet McCabe and the others who are in the decision-making area for EPA. This is the big question right now, and this is the one that's getting a lot of political attention. To plan or not to plan? And I don't mean to make light of it by using that title for the slide. We happen to believe, and while I'm talking, if you read the bottom quote from Governor Beshear, we happen to agree, we happen to feel that submitting a plan is not necessarily arbitrary. If you look at what the Clean Air Act says, and I didn't write those laws were written in D.C. back in 1990 and even earlier in 1970, etc. It says really that states shall. It doesn't use may, doesn't say could. It says shall submit a plan. Okay? If you don't submit the plan, you always have that obligation. But if you don't submit a plan, EPA shall, in fact, put in a federal implementation plan. So, looking at that as background, our position is very, very simple. We feel that we should be working very assiduously in order to develop a plan for Kentucky, because we believe that a plan specific for Kentucky is much better than a plan that would result from some federally imposed plan, which doesn't consider the variations among the states. There is disagreement on that particular point, but that's where we are. And let me say something about that disagreement. The disagreement is in no way over whether or not manufacturing is important to Kentucky or not. That is given. We know that. We disagree on the strategies and how we should move forward. Okay, so it is not a disagreement over what the end goal is. But we feel that we need to be prepared in the eventuality that challenges to the plan-making process, challenges to the legal challenges that will be making its way through court for the next 5 years at least. During that period of time, there will most likely be a plan that will be implemented in some manner. If it's not implemented, if it doesn't occur, all we've lost is some planning time. If it does occur, we are in a much better position to look at what Kentucky needs and where Kentucky should go as a state as opposed to the federal government moving in. There's a lot of discussion right now as to what a federal plan might look like. Supposedly EPA is going to give us a little bit of information when they put out the final rule on 111D come August. We don't know that. There are a variety of things that have been suggested. You'll hear rumors about a cap and trade. You hear rumors about simply regulating CO2 at the source, at the individual stack. We happen to believe that taking a mass-based approach, looking at all of the EGU sources across Kentucky, is a healthier way to go for the state than to deal with some sort of cap-and-trade system, because cap-and-trade we view very much as a tax on coal, and what it does will inevitably raise the price of electricity. So we feel that we should be prepared to submit a plan, and if that plan continues to be evaluated, continues to be looked at, we believe that that's going to be a preferred way in the event that the various litigations that are occurring do not change the course in any significant way. So our goal is simple: protect our manufacturing economy, maintain affordable electricity rates, ensure grid reliability, maximize the use of existing resources, and retain state primacy. So, a couple of closing comments. We have known for some time that greenhouse gas emission limits were a matter of when, not if. In fact, we even stated in the Energy Plan of 2008. At that point in time, cap and trade was what was being discussed in D.C. Lieberman Warner, Lieberman McCain, and a variety of other activities. We have to contend with the reality that going forward, this is a quote out of the Energy Plan, we have to contend with the reality that going forward, our state's energy policy will be increasingly shaped by decisions at the national level. Let me just stop there. That has come true. I mean, clearly, that trend was developing in greenhouse gases. We could see it in the early part of the 21st century, and in fact, it is really becoming a reality today. And these decisions, in turn, are being driven by significant global issues and events. Again, greenhouse gas is a global problem, not just a Kentucky problem, not just a U.S. problem, but we're wrestling as a nation with how we move forward. So I told you I was going to use the word climate at least once. But regardless of what one's opinion is on climate science, the momentum to address greenhouse gas emissions has grown significantly, and our state's energy future is inextricably linked to these national policies. Again, just let me reinforce, not all of the changes that are occurring in the EGU sector are coming from the current discussion on greenhouse gas regulations. MATS has been an important area, as well as CSAPR. And the final point that we never want to lose sight of, that affordability, number one, not necessarily one, and reliability, maybe it's 1A and 1B, probably it's not a 1 or a 2, it's both of them together. That is important for our manufacturing sector. It's important for us as homeowners, but I can tell you if you have an interruption in a manufacturing operation, especially with a very, very energy-intensive industry, you don't recover from that in an hour. You don't recover from that in a day. It may take a month or two or three months to recover. So we feel that reliability and that affordability remains a priority we feel shouldn't only remain a priority for us, remains a priority for the nation. The affordability issue has one other aspect to it that is important, then I will finish. I've been given the stop sign. I didn't get all the minutes yielded to me. But in any event, the energy costs, as they go up, are really hurting the lower income families much heavier. We already have families in certain parts of the state, particularly eastern Kentucky, where their energy bills, not because the rates are high, but simply because they're living in homes that are inefficient energy-wise, where they're having to make the decision whether or not they're going to pay their energy bills or pay their medical bills. That's not a position that we should want any Kentuckian, we should want any person in at this particular point in time. But it's also important that we protect the manufacturing sector to have over 200,000 jobs ongoing in the state. Thank you for your time, and I'd be pleased to answer questions.
Lynn, one question, if I may. You correctly indicated the energy industry is moving or a flight to natural gas. We're starting to see a lot of regulatory and legislative pressures on shale gas production. Where do we run to next should that occur?
John, that's a very, very good question. In all of our analyses, one of the significant factors is what do you put in for the price of natural gas? And that is the greatest concern we have, because we're looking at building assets that are going to be here for 40, 50, 60 years. It's not that we're going to go out and buy a new car 2 years from now. If natural gas prices get above about $10 per million, 2015 dollars per million, then you cross the path, you cross over as to whether or not is now the least cost. And the price volatility of natural gas is the biggest concern we have in going to a heavily dominated natural gas portfolio. It's a mistake, because if those prices go up to $10 to $12 to $14, our electricity rates will be going up correspondingly, because fuel costs are a greater portion of the electricity rates than it has been true for coal over the years. And I agree with the previous speakers. I'm for an all-of-the-above strategy, a legitimate all-of-the-above strategy. And many of you know me, and to my way of thinking, that strategy should include a third type of base load. I don't think we can ignore forever not discussing whether or not we should build nuclear plants in Kentucky. Yes?
The EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases came as a result of executive order. What can executive order do for us to either defer or eradicate 111B and D?
Well, first of all, I'm not an attorney, okay? That's a caveat, and I'm not saying I'm glad I'm not an attorney, okay? Please, with all due deference, I have a lot of attorneys in the cabinet, and I rely on them every day. But you look at where the courts have been over the past decade. They have been very deferential, I think it's fair to say. The attorney friends in the crowd, they've been very deferential to EPA at this particular point in time. I don't believe they're going to change that deference with 111D and 111B. There will be a lot of litigation. The unfortunate thing is that during that litigation, there will also be requirements in place for a plan, just like we've had to do with mercury and air toxics. And there was a final piece of a decision, just 5 months ago or something, on the mercury rule. So I think the courts have continued to be very deferential to EPA, and I really don't see that occurring. But please understand, I've been wrong many, many times in my life. But, you know, history is not telling us that that's going to occur. Yes.
Thank you for coming. If Kentucky does indeed submit a plan for carbon dioxide emissions, what guarantee do we have the EPA won't just change it to whatever they want anyway?
Well, you know, I think you know, the current plan for 111D. Now I'm going to be making a future prediction that probably I won't be around here to live for, to see whether or not I was right or wrong. But we're working on you know, the way 111D is set up, we're working on a plan to really have some regulations in force beginning in 2020, but ultimately finally there in 2030. Are we going to stop there? No. It will continue on, and I think you're going to see even further restriction in greenhouse gas emissions post-2030. Let me further say this. There are going to be actions, and how they evolve, I don't have any idea, on natural gas as a fuel for electricity generation as well. So it's not going to stop just with coal in that particular regard. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Peters, thank you so much for your leadership with energy and all your support, even for education. I know that you and CAM and manufacturing have been so supportive of the education and the impacts from the changes in the energy climate. You are responding very well to what is happening in Eastern Kentucky. We do have a little bit of figures in for this coming year from Western Kentucky, and I think that was certainly a hit that we had not expected. For example, in Muhlenberg County, last year revenues from TVA were at $10 million. Projected for this year, they are at $5.7 million. And I know that there are certainly efforts very focused for Eastern Kentucky. Are there efforts at this point focused on Western Kentucky, such as Muhlenberg County?
You know, SOAR, which is a very, very good program looking at where we can find opportunities in Eastern Kentucky, has been advanced by Governor Beshear and Congressman Rogers, a Democrat and a Republican working together, which in and of itself is significant, but they've had a long history of knowing one another, and I think that helps tremendously. I think we're just beginning to see the impact in Western Kentucky, and how permanent it's going to be is unclear at this point in time, but some impact in Western Kentucky on coal mining. We have seen a couple of significant layoffs over the last month. What that number is going to be when we issue the next coal employment report in the end of the current quarter we're in, I don't know. But in any event, it's not nearly reached the status as it has in Eastern Kentucky. I think we're going to learn a lot from the SOAR, what works, what doesn't work, how are we going to do it. It's not going to be a short-term effort. It's going to be decades. The governor and the congressman both talk about being in it for the long haul. I think it's going to provide some examples of things that can be done, which if those trends continue in Western Kentucky, I think they would be applicable there. You let me off?